And welcome to the Open Center and to the open house for the Esoteric Quest. I'm Ralph White. I'm co-founder of the Open Center and director of the Esoteric Quest. And it's been going on for 25 years, believe it or not. So we have many familiar faces out here, so great to see you all back. And we are this year kind of going back to our roots. This all began in 1995 in a little town called Český Krumlov in southern Bohemia, the southern Bohemian mecca of alchemists, as I later discovered that it was, which I stumbled across way back when. And little did I know that it was really a pivotal spiritual center for Renaissance Europe. But it was behind the Iron Curtain for 60 years or 50 years, so nobody knew anything about it. And I happened to stumble across it, and when we did the very first Esoteric Quest, even before we called them Esoteric Quests, that's where it took place. And little did I know that it would set in motion a series that's been going on for a quarter of a century now. And it's hard to believe, actually, that it's really gone on that far. But, you know, because I've been involved in not just the Esoteric Quest, but all aspects of the Open Center, there's an enormous neglect of the Western traditions. There's a huge emphasis in the holistic world in general on yoga, shamanism, Buddhism, etc., which is all well and good. I'm all in favor of it. But the Western traditions tend to be neglected. So that's why I decided to start this all these years ago. And here we are, going strong. So it began in Bohemia. We called it the Rosicrucian Enlightenment Revisited. And it really referred to the time, the late 16th and early 17th century, when magic and spirituality and science were all one. When the alchemist went into his laboratory and gazed upon great dramas of the soul as he saw the transmutations and the like happening within the alchemical alembic. So this year, you could say that we're going back to Eastern Europe. We're going back to Bulgaria. It's going to be the first time since 2006 that we've been in Eastern Europe, in the Slavic-speaking world. But we're going to an area that was really entirely unknown to me before I went there last year. And that is here, that's Thrace. In the ancient world, this was known as Thrace. Who were the most famous Thracians? Orpheus. The semi-divine Greek being of poetry and song, Orpheus with his lyre, who could charm the beasts, the flowers, the trees, and who descended into the underworld in search of his wife Eurydice, who had died. So this is the home turf of Orpheus. And the other most famous Thracian is Spartacus, actually. But of course that's a very different aspect, and that's the Roman period, not the pre-Greek period. But the Thracian culture actually precedes ancient Greek culture. So let us just look at them for a minute at all the different ways. What happened there? Okay. That this quest relates to prior quests, because this is actually, it's the 15th one. By the time we do it, it'll be 25 years. So it's the 15th, and we've really done them all over Europe. They've been mainly centered in Europe. The first two were in the Czech Republic, or Bohemia. The western part of the Czech Republic is Bohemia, a much older region than Czechoslovakia. They didn't last very long. So we did two there. The one I mentioned, the Rosicrucian Enlightenment Revisited. We did one 2 years later in Prague. Alchemy and the Hermetic tradition. You can see a poster for it. It's getting a little scruffy now, but it's out there in the hallway. When you go outside, you see a whole bunch of posters, and many of them are from the different Esoteric Quests that we did. So that was Prague, Alchemy, and the Hermetic tradition. We did one in Wales, too, on the Arthurian and Grail traditions. We also have a poster from that out there. And then we did one in Florence. On the attached, there's also a poster there. Yeah, I do. Thanks, Jimmy. That was the one, you'll see it out there, on the Italian Renaissance and the esoteric traditions. the Hermetic, the Kabbalistic, the Neoplatonic. With the Renaissance, we remember the painting, the queues around the block for the Uffizi Gallery or the other major galleries in Florence, but everybody's forgotten the philosophy. Remember the art, but we've forgotten the philosophy of the Renaissance. And of course, the Renaissance man is the original whole person. So that was a beautiful experience in Florence. And we've since done 2 more in the Czech Republic. Oh, well, no, 1 more actually. That's when we first began to use the term Esoteric Quest in 2006. And that one was called an Esoteric Quest in Central Europe, and it went from Kutná Hora, another alchemical town in Bohemia, to Marienbad, and wound up in Weimar, where we looked at Goethe. So that was from Renaissance Bohemia to Goethe and Schiller's Weimar in the 18th, early 19th century. And since then we've done, I'll quickly run through them, we did a quest for the golden age of Andalusia in Granada, Spain, looking at Sufis, Kabbalists, and Christian philosophers. So we wanted to find a time when those 3 major Abrahamic religions all coexisted, convivencia. And we've also gone into the ancient world, which relates to this show, because Thrace, there's also Samothrace. Samothrace, where we did an esoteric quest for the mysteries of antiquity on the wonderful island of Samothrace, where the mysteries of the Kabiri, the great gods, were celebrated in the sanctuary there. And that's actually very close to Turkey. So some of us went then to Istanbul afterwards, to the Sufi and Byzantine worlds of Istanbul. And then many of us who did that went on down the Ionian coast to Ephesus, Didyme, and all those extraordinary ancient centers of mystery that were down on the Ionian coast of what is now Turkey. We also did Alexandria. We did an esoteric quest for ancient Alexandria, Greco-Egyptian birthplace of the Western mind. And believe it or not, we co-sponsored it with the Library of Alexandria. I mean, I thought, Yale or Oxford or somebody had got in there ahead of us. Do you want to do a conference that brings alive the whole world of ancient Alexandria? But no. I showed up. I had the goal to approach the Library of Alexandria, which has been rebuilt more or less where they think the old one was. And that was an outstanding event, except we had to postpone it for a year because of the revolution. But that, I will never forget that esoteric quest. And the Egyptian people could not have been more gracious, more welcoming. But we were about the only tourists in Egypt at the time, because things were still pretty wild there. But it was an amazing and beautiful experience. Then we were in Sicily, because people think of Sicily, and New Yorkers tend to think Sicilians are all living out on Howard Beach with baseball bats looking to give people, minorities, a hard time. They're not like that at all. Sicily is actually one of the most sophisticated parts of Italy, the successive waves of invasion. So we were really looking there for a time when all different cultures coexisted. And actually in the 12th century, Sicily was the most tolerant part of Europe. It was the only place in Europe where you could walk through the countryside, you could have heard a rabbi, or you've seen him on his way to the synagogue, you could have heard a cry from the minaret of the muezzin calling the faithful to prayer in Islam. And then you had both Catholic Christianity and Byzantine Christianity all coexisting in 12th century Sicily. It was an amazingly tolerant and sophisticated place. So I'm a big fan of Sicily. And of course it was an ancient Greek colony. And we started off that one by really focusing on Pythagoras, because Pythagoras' center in Crotona was not in Sicily, but just across the sea on the sole of the boot of Italy. So then we went on following that. Then we did an esoteric quest in the south of France on the Cathars and the Troubadours. Now, how many of you have heard of the Cathars? A good number. Everybody who's on the quest heard of the Cathars. But the other really tolerant, brilliant place in Europe was the south of France, Languedoc, in the 12th century. Beautiful part of the world. And the Cathars, who were Gnostic Christians, should we say, and who were preceded by the Bogomils, who we will learn about a little bit about tonight. That's what we're going to get into, and that's going to be one of the main foci of the quest. The whole Bogomil world, Gnostic, you could say Manichaean Christians, except that the usual notion we have of Manichaeism is a joke. It's not. It was all, just like the Cathars, the Manichaeans, they were written up by their enemies, and they just presented a parody of what they called the Holy Religion of Light. And it was the first world religion. Where Mani, the founder of it, understood that Christianity, Buddhism, and Zoroastrianism all speak the same essential truth, and he taught that. And then we'll talk about that later. But that's what the Cathars were attuned to. They were into reincarnation. So, as were the Orphic Mysteries. And so that was the south of France, which was an exquisite experience. Then we did something entirely different, and we headed away from that beaten track, and we headed to the Mysteries of the North. We did an esoteric quest for the Mysteries of the North in Iceland, in the Snæfellsnes Peninsula, the far west of Iceland, way off the beaten track. That's where Jules Verne set Journey to the Center of the Earth, underneath the holy mountain, the Snæfellsjökull. And then we did a wonderful post-conference there in the West Fjords of Iceland. So we were deeply into the whole world of Odin and Thor and Heimdall and the Rainbow Bridge and Ragnarok and all of that. So yeah, we're including all the mysteries here. And then after Iceland, we did Scotland. We went to the Outer Hebrides of Scotland, and we did it in a castle on a Scottish island, Lewes Castle, in the town of Stornoway, which is the capital of the Outer Hebrides. And amazingly enough, this castle had lain empty, a ruin really, for 25 years. And I saw a picture of it. I want to introduce, and this is Andrea Lamanto here, who is the beating heartbeat of the Esoteric Quest. It's all true. And I remember, Andrea and I were looking at the pictures of the Outer Hebrides, and we were looking on Google, and we saw a picture of this castle. And I thought, wow, look at that castle. If that's available, let's do it there. And lo and behold, they had just had a big grant from the Highlands and Islands Commission, or wherever the whole thing had been renovated, and we were the first people to do a conference there ever since it was renovated in a beautiful Scottish castle. But it wasn't a medieval castle. It was built by a 19th century Scottish opium dealer, I'm sorry to say. But we did have a Chinese attendee, and one of our presenters who will be at the Open Center in May, Alistair, actually issued a beautiful apology to the Chinese people for the abuse that took place there with the Opium Wars. So, and then we did something entirely different last year, and we went to South America. That's the first time we've gone to the Americas. Oh, I'm missing one. We did in 2008, we did Inner America as well. That was after the big crash. Nobody was going abroad, the recession. And so we did it upstate, an esoteric quest for Inner America. We began with an Onondaga clan mother, and we looked at the whole, people don't realize that upstate New York was, in 19th century America, it was the counterpart to 20th century 60s in California. It was filled with alternative spiritual movements, upstate New York. And some of those amazing women were both pioneering feminists, they were Theosophists, and one of them, Matilda Jocelyn Gage, was initiated into the Mohawk Nation. Those were incredible women up there in the mid-19th century in upstate New York. So last year we were in Peru and Bolivia, my old stomping ground. I hitchhiked to Machu Picchu when I was 23, so it's always had a special place in my heart. And that was a very beautiful experience. Well, 4 days on Lake Titicaca, the island of the sun, the island of the moon, many ceremonies with Kilauea, which is what the Aymara call their shamans there. So that was a beautiful experience. And then now we're coming a little bit back to home this year. So you can see we've covered a lot. This is the 15th Esoteric Quest. We've been all over the world, or the Western world. And each time we go on one of these quests, our goal is to attune to that culture, to approach it in an attitude of deep respect. We're there to learn. That's why everywhere we've gone, we've been greeted with enormous warmth and charm, because we're there to really honor the depths of their own culture, even depths that may have been forgotten within that culture itself. And so this year in Bulgaria, I've had the very good fortune to have as a program advisor Uri Stoyanov, who those of us who were in France would remember Uri. Do some of you remember Uri? Remember that big, nobody's got a sense of the big picture like Uri. But he wrote a classic book called The Hidden Tradition in Europe. He's Bulgarian, so you've got to be Bulgarian to know this stuff. But he was a Francis Yates Fellow at the Warburg Institute in London for a long time. So Uri has really turned us on to many of the wonderful presenters that we have in this year's quest, who I would never have met otherwise. So we're coming back to home a bit this year, back to Europe, back to Eastern Europe, back to the Slavic language. As I mentioned, this year's quest is connected to Samothrace, when we did the Mysteries of Antiquity on the island of Samothrace in Greece in the northeast Aegean. It's connected to the south of France, where we did the Cathars, because we'll be doing the Bogomils in Bulgaria and the Balkans, but their successors were the Cathars in France and the Valdensians in northern Italy. And it's connected to Bohemia, where it's all part of that Slavic world. In fact, at one point there was a ruler who ruled both Bulgaria, what is now Bulgaria, and Bohemia. So, you know, we've got many, let's see, what else? Were there any other connections there? Oh, and also, we're going to, our opening night in Plovdiv, and I'll talk a little bit about Plovdiv. Our opening night in Plovdiv, which is where we're going to do it. Who's ever heard of Plovdiv? I hadn't heard. Who's heard of Plovdiv? Now, Plovdiv, it's not the most elegant name that you... It's been called many things in history. It used to be called Philippopolis, because it was named after Philip of Macedonia, the father of Alexander the Great. And so Bulgaria is right next to Macedonia. So in the ancient world, you know, you didn't have the same borders as we have today. So... yeah, so we're going to connect to, actually our opening night in Plovdiv is going to be in a Sufi teke. A teke is where the Sufis would gather. And on the Esoteric Quest, we've been fortunate enough to actually be guests of honor of 3 Sufi brotherhoods, which was a deep privilege. I'll never forget those experiences. One of them was in Marrakesh, because after we did our quest in Andalusia, in Granada, some of us went on to Marrakesh for the post-conference journey, and we wound up, wow, in the most beautiful building in old Marrakesh. Really guests of these wonderful, gracious, charming, warm-hearted Sufis. It was a beautiful building. I found out later it was the most beautiful building in Marrakesh. And they just did it. I thought we'd just be meeting 2 or 3 Sufis who were friends of the guy who'd helped me organize the conference, or us organize the conference in Spain. But they turned out to be incredibly gracious and charming. And then we were also guests of a Sufi brotherhood in Istanbul, an unusual one. They had a woman spiritual teacher. And then we were also guests of a Sufi brotherhood in Egypt, in Alexandria, Egypt, at the end of the quest there. And that, I've never met anybody who's ever even met an Egyptian Sufi. They're very hard to meet. So we were very fortunate to be able to, some of us were even able actually to practice with them for, unforgettable experiences. So we're going to connect to the Sufi thing here, because Bulgaria was actually under the Ottomans for 500 years. So yeah, it's something to bear in mind. And they were only liberated from the Ottomans in the 1880s. Really late. I mean, look on the map. What happened to it? This is Bulgaria here, but that's Istanbul. So it was very, very close to the center of the Ottoman Empire. So the Ottomans gave up Bulgaria very, very reluctantly. I always just wonder, where is Eastern Rumelia? I now know where Eastern Rumelia is. That is southern Bulgaria, but it was only joined with Bulgaria in the 1880s. And that's where we'll actually be meeting. We'll be meeting at the Unification Hall in Plovdiv. So a little about Plovdiv. Plovdiv is the oldest living city in Europe. It's a really extraordinary thing. It's been continuously occupied for 6,000 years. And it goes way, way back to ancient Thrace. And I went there for the first time last year to sort this all out. And it has one of the most uncanny, mysterious vibes of anywhere. that when I stumbled across Český Krumlov in the early 90s, the southern Bohemian mecca of alchemists, that was, oh my God, what have I stepped into here? It's another reality. And I didn't quite have the same feeling, but this is a unique mix here because you've got all kinds of influences, the Thracian, the Greek, the Roman. You've got the Byzantine. You've got the Bogomil, or actually they were called Paulicians at that point. I'll talk about it a bit later. And then you've got the Ottomans and the Sufis. Then you've got the Russian Orthodox. And then you've got the communists. So, we can't pretend that Bulgaria was not communist for 40 odd years. It was. And the Bulgarian secret police were very close to the KGB. So, it has all that. So the outskirts of Plovdiv look like a communist city, but where we will be is in the inner core. Anybody who's been to Prague knows that the outskirts of Prague are these horrendous communist-style identikit high-rises, but when you get to the center of Prague, it's beautiful. You can't, obviously Plovdiv is much smaller than that, but we'll be in Kapana, which is the old market district. It's the bohemian artistic part of town, and in the old city. I'll show some slides of all of this. So Plovdiv is it's been continuously occupied. It's one of the two cultural capitals of Europe this year. All these things that inclined us towards it. And then when I read that 200,000 Paulicians, who were the precursors of the Bogomils, remember the Bogomils were the precursors of the Cathars, so this is following that Gnostic Manichaean stream all the way back. The Paulicians were in what is now called Asia Minor. It would have been close. They were in between the Byzantines to the west and the Muslims to the east, and they had their own world for 200 years. And they were serious about their spiritual practice there. But eventually 200,000 of them were transported to the western edge of the Byzantine Empire, to Plovdiv actually, 200,000 Gnostic Christians transported in the 970s to Plovdiv. So you can imagine the impact that had. They were there because they were considered formidable fighters, and it was now the western border of the Byzantine Empire, you had the pagan Bulgars sweeping in from the steppes, taking part of the Byzantine world. So the Byzantines moved the 200,000 Paulicians to deal with that over there. So Plovdiv actually has an ancient esoteric history. And there's so many factors that make it a magical place. Yeah, I should mention, that they are long time, the Valley of the Thracian Kings, the valley that near where Plovdiv is, they were not only followers and worshippers of Orpheus, the semi-divine god of poetry and music, and always associated with the Greek mysteries, but they were also followers of Dionysus. It happens to be a fabulous wine-growing region. I don't know why the wine stores of New York are not filled with Bulgarian wine, because they know they've been growing wine there for 3,000 years, and they know how to do it. It's outstanding wine. And so in fact, we'll be going the second day on our quest, the pre-con. We do a 2-day pre-conference journey. Our first day will be in Sofia. That's what they call it, not Sofia. I always thought it was Sophia, but it's pronounced Sofia. So we'll be going down to a wine spa on the edge of the Valley of the Thracian Kings, and where they actually have a replica of a Thracian initiation tomb. The Thracians had as the center of their worldview the immortalization of the soul. So all of these things. So now I'm going to just run through a little of this. So, now, when I say that I've never been anywhere in the world that had so many levels of civilization. Our first morning in Sofia, we're going to go to the Archaeological Museum. And it's like, whoa! These figurines, this is a modern artist who's inspired by one of the ancient figurines. These are 35,000 years old. These images of the archetypal feminine great mother image, you actually go, people have been inhabiting that region for 35,000 years, since the very beginning. You can see on little scratched pieces of stone the very first writing, the very first attempt to communicate by human beings. It's amazing how ancient it is. So it just gives you a sense of just how far back history goes in that part of the world. Now here, I don't know if you can see it. It's, can we dim the lights? That's a vase with, and you can see that's Orpheus with his lyre. You see it there? You can't dim them. What about the sconces? I'm putting those on instead. Yeah, perfect. Or you could just put the wall lights on. Can you do that? Never mind. Just turn them off, Andrew. Yeah. Okay. So there, that's better. You can see Orpheus with his lyre there. Now, as I mentioned, his lyre that is said to have charmed the beasts of the field, the birds, the plants. He had a magical capacity to charm the world. And the earliest mysteries are associated with Orpheus. You know, of course, the great mystery centers of ancient Greece, this is Thrace, before Greece. So, in fact, Herodotus, the father of history, tells us that the original mysteries were called something like the Thracicalia, because the original Greek mysteries came from Thrace. It's a reference to Thrace, Thracicalia. So, and of course it was there, we were the famous mystery centers, of course, Delphi, with the inscription, "Know thyself," over the top of it. But there have been others. Didyme, a place where we went. I think it was good. How did you like it? I think it's good just when it was dark, I think, Andrea. Yeah, that's good. Is that good? Yeah. So the original mysteries were from there, and of course that's where the initiates would go into these mystery centers. That's why we did Samothrace. For 1,000 years there was a mystery center on Samothrace in the Sanctuary of the Great Gods from 600 BC to 400 AD. And one of the last surviving mysteries, Herodotus, I mentioned him, the father of history, he was initiated on Samothrace, and many great, Alexander the Great's parents met on Samothrace and so on. So anyway, these are the mysteries of Orpheus, the initiates of the Orphic Mysteries first begin to appear in Athens around the 5th century. They must have come south from Thrace. And so it was clear, of course, people could never reveal what took place in the mysteries under pain of death. So we have no written accounts of what the mysteries of the ancient world were about. But we can turn to other sources. I'm a big fan of Rudolf Steiner, for instance. I don't know how many of you know him. And he even wrote the most encyclopedic esoteric mind of the 20th century. All you have to do is Google Bulgaria. Oh my God. So he gave me a whole new way of looking at Bulgaria. So here is Orpheus. And so remember there's a number of famous aspects of Orpheus. One of them is that he speaks in a first voice in the Argonautica. So the story of Jason and the Argonauts and their quest for the golden fleece, it's spoken in the first person in the voice of Orpheus. And Orpheus was when the rowers who were rowing into the Black Sea, which is where the golden fleece was, because there were Greek colonies all around the Black Sea, and we'll be visiting some of them on the Bulgarian post-conference journey. But Orpheus played with his lyre and his amazing music. He was able to create the music that actually powered the oarsmen of the Argus to keep rowing into that. Must have been a wild and journey. So I never thought of that. Orpheus as like beating, the rhythm of the great ship heading, I don't know how great it was, of the ship heading into the Black Sea. So that's one of them. The other aspect of the Orphic myth, of course, is the descent into the underworld. And so the Orphic themes are throughout literature and opera. In fact, we're going to be privileged. We're actually going to be able to see a performance of Monteverdi's opera of Orpheus in the Roman theatre. I'll show you pictures. It's amazing. It's the European Festival of Culture there, or Capital of Culture. They are bringing in one of Italy's leading operatic companies. They happen to be performing while we are there, which is a nice synchronicity. It's like when we were in Syracuse in Sicily, there was an incredible performance too in the Greek theatre there of Antigone, the great Greek play. So, so he descended, his wife, Eurydice, at their wedding nuptials is bitten by a snake, and she dies, and she descends into the underworld, and he is heartbroken, you can imagine. And his song is so filled with lament that the whole world hears it. And then he descends into the underworld to find her. And in fact, we're going to be going there. You know, we could do 2 post-conference journeys, one in Bulgaria, one's going to be in northern Romania. And I was there, actually, this amazing cavern that takes you right, it's one of the most amazing caves I've ever been into, in the Rhodope Mountains that separate Greece and Bulgaria. And well, you go down into this massive cavern in a great cleft in the earth, the Trigon Gorge, this narrow cleft between these mountains, and then you descend into the earth in this huge cavern. And it's filled with the resounding echoes of this enormous underground river that is plunging deep into the earth. I had a very memorable meditation there. So those of us who go on the Bulgarian post-conference journey will also have the chance to do that. That's where we begin. That's our first night when the conference part of the quest is over. So Orpheus is associated with the descent into the underworld. And a lot of the fragments of the Orphic hymns actually speak about life after death. And they actually, there are clear references to reincarnation in it as well. So let's go on from here. Oops. So let me just read a little bit to you from here. Orphic, I don't know how many of you can read that, but it says, Orpheus is the musician and singer par excellence. It is with his music that he persuaded Hades to release Eurydice, and it is with his music that he charmed animals, trees, and stones, though that theme became popular only in late antiquity. It was for his musicianship that he was selected as the Calustes, the man who beat the rhythm to the oarsmen of the Argo, the famous ship of Jason and his Argonauts. As Euripides tells us, by the mast amidships the Thracian lyre cried out in mournful Asian plaint, singing commands to the rowers for their long sweeping strokes. Yeah, so he was, poets and singers, it's saying here, were outside the normal social order. They had a special connection with the muses. And Orpheus was said to be the son of Calliope, who was a muse. So he is only half human. And yeah, Orpheus. So we're going to the land of Orpheus. And even here, that's, if you ever actually go to the catacombs in Rome, I'm sure some of you have, for me it's the most beautiful image of Christ that I've seen down there. It was Christ as Orpheus, dressed as a young man in a shepherd's tunic with a lamb. Of course, it's also a reference to the Good Shepherd. But yeah, when we were in Cyprus, after we did the Alexandria class, one of the post-conference journeys went to Cyprus, because in the time of Cleopatra, Cyprus was under the control of Egypt. Ptolemaic Egypt, and so when we went there, we met with the bishop of Cyprus, who was a lovely man, through a friend of ours called Kyriakos Markides, and we walked into his reception room, and the first thing I saw was a beautiful marble statue of Christ, just like that, Christ as Orpheus. So this really refers to one of the presentations, one of the workshops we're going to do in Bulgaria is on the relationship between the Thracian mysteries and early Christianity. So there was an early, before Constantine adopted Christianity as the official imperial religion. In the early centuries of Christianity, there was still a mystery Christianity that was still connected to the old mystery traditions. And so we're going to have Diana Gorgova, who appears to be Bulgaria's leading authority on Thracian archaeology. So she's coming with us on the pre-conference. We got the #1 person in Bulgaria. And she's presently excavating a site which had not been discovered previously, which is where Alexander the Great is said to have gone to receive oracular wisdom. before he made his great journey to the east, conquering the Persian Empire, etc. And we all know that, well, those of us who've read about it, know that when he was in Egypt, he went into the Siwa desert oasis seeking inspiration from the higher worlds. Well, he did the same thing in what is now Bulgaria as well. So Diana is excavating that. And they haven't released it to the world yet, but that's going to be a big archaeological event when it happens. So we're big fans of Alexander the Great. So after being in Alexandria. This is, I mentioned, the wine there. That's actually a Roman rendition. You can tell it's got a different aesthetic about it. But that's Dionysus. So we will be, these quests are not shy about enjoying what the good things that culture offers. And definitely the good wine is part of the Dionysian tradition. God of wine and ecstasy. And appreciated and worshipped in the region, this region of Bulgaria, for many thousands of years. This is Philip of Macedonia. That is Alexander's father. As I mentioned, Philip and his wife met on Samothrace. They were both there to be initiated on Samothrace. And so he's the person who came out of Macedonia, conquered this part of the world from the Thracians. And that's why Plovdiv was known as Philippopolis for centuries. Now, this is a Thracian horseman, just to give you a sense of the beautiful art. Well, we're going to meet in the Unification Hall in Plovdiv, and right next door to it is a lovely archaeological museum. And the beauty, the sophistication, some people think that's a precursor of St. George, that it came down through the centuries. But obviously it was, there was a lot of riding going on in that culture. And the gold, the metalwork is really a beautiful thing, but that's from way, way back. That is another, it's the Thracian Pegasus. Look at the quality of the work there. I mean, the Thracians are thought to have come in from the Asian steppes at some point. Nobody knows exactly when. Or maybe, maybe the archaeologist in the museum can tell us this. That's a little reference to Spartacus. That's the Bolshoi Ballet. Those are shields there. So just a famous figure from Thracian history. Now we're in Plovdiv. So you can see here, this is the Roman theatre. This is where it's one of the best preserved Roman theatres in the world. In Bulgaria, what? I mean, who knew? I had no idea. But I mean, that's where we will see the performance of Orpheus, Monteverdi's Orpheus, during the quest. That's it. We'll see it more like that. That is the Roman theatre by night. There's another one. Now, as I mentioned, that we're going to begin. Our very first evening is going to be in a Mevlevi Sufi tekke. And a tekke was the place where the Sufis would assemble to perform their sacred spiritual rituals. And the Mevlevi, of course, that's Jalaluddin Rumi's order. When we were in Istanbul, when we did the Esoteric Quest to the Sufi and Byzantine worlds of Istanbul, we saw the Mevlevi dervishes doing this. So they're the whirling dervishes. So of course, there are many different kinds of dervish and Sufi, but this happens to be, we are actually going to have our opening night. It's no longer used, obviously during the 500 years when it was under the Ottoman control. That's when the Sufis were so powerful there. But we're going to actually have a presentation. I've even found somebody who can actually speak on the Sufi orders during the Ottoman period, and the Mevlevis were one of the most significant. So, Rumi is the most popular poet in America. Most people have no idea he was a Muslim scholar. But there they are. So this is, I don't know, I guess that was taken in the 19th century. But it's, you can see them, they're about to begin their whirling. And you can see the musicians here with their pipes, and that's probably the master who's keeping them all grounded. So yeah, I'm thrilled. I was, that's the thing about Plovdiv, that old city. You walk into a room, oh my God, it's a Sufi tekke, or it used to be. You can still see the remains of it. And then you turn a corner, go through a doorway, and you're suddenly in a Byzantine church, from 1,000-year-old tiny little Byzantine church with beautiful frescoes. And then you walk outside there, and then somebody's offering you a glass of wine and a wine tasting. What? So it's a very unusual place. That's actually the first thing we're going to do. Our first morning in Sofia, we're going to visit the Alexander Nevsky Cathedral, which is a Neo-Byzantine, beautiful cathedral actually. It was built to honor the Russian soldiers who played the biggest role in liberating Bulgaria from the Turks in the 1880s. So it's filled with beautiful frescoes on the inside, like so much of the... Of course, Bulgarian Orthodox is similar to Greek Orthodox and similar to Russian Orthodox. So they have maintained the mystical spirit traditions. We lost it all in the West. They still had Plato when we lost almost all of Plato. And so, anybody familiar with the Russian Orthodox knows about the Jesus prayer and the constant spiritual practices of all those Russian mystics and so on. And the Greeks. So the Bulgarians are very much part of that. So there's a very strong mystical tradition within the church. And we're actually going to go one afternoon. It's about 45 minutes outside Plovdiv. We're going to go to the Bachkovo monastery. And you can see some of the frescoes in there. But it's an impressive place. I mean, I was there in December and it was freezing cold and there wasn't a soul. I was the only person there, except for the monks. I'm sure it'll be different in the summer. But, you can really feel the depth of the spirituality. And, of course, they were maintaining that during the Ottoman period as well. So. Now, I mentioned these just to give you a little, just to come now to switch to another important aspect. The Cathars here. This is where Carcassonne, that's where we did our Esoteric Quest, right there, the most beautifully preserved medieval city in France. And, but then you have these guys, the Paulicians. Now the map doesn't go this far, it should go up here. Up here is the Silk Road. And our man Uri Stoyanov will fill in the picture. The talk he gave in Carcassonne on the roots of this Gnostic Manichaean spiritual path was amazing. Even people who have encyclopedic minds they're stunned. Because you've got to be Bulgarian or Eastern European to know this stuff. So here are the Paulicians. This is Asia Minor. It would have been Armenia over here where they were, in between the Byzantine Christians to the left and the Muslims to the east. But where did they come from? Ultimately, the teachings, the so-called Manichaean Gnostic teachings, they actually came from up here on the Silk Road. Because really, Mani was a 3rd century prophet from Mesopotamia, what is now Iraq. But he, literally 3rd century. So he journeyed to Persia, to the east of where he grew up, where of course Zoroastrianism was the predominant path. Then he journeyed further east into Afghanistan and what is now Pakistan, which was then Buddhist. And he returned to Mesopotamia with a deep spiritual understanding that Christianity, Buddhism, and Zoroastrianism all spoke the same essential truth. They called it the holy religion of light. Certainly was not called Manichaeism. And it was the first world religion. So initially Mani was graciously received by the emperor in Persia, the Emperor Shapur. But then he died, and his son or grandson, unfortunately some fundamentalist Zoroastrian priests got his ear and turned him against Mani. So Mani was imprisoned and died. But he was an artist as well as a teacher and a writer. They found right on the Silk Road, they found this tiny little book, 1 inch square, called the Cologne Codex. And the whole teachings of Manichaeism, so-called, holy religion of light, are in there. And how did they do it? They didn't have magnifying glasses. Beautiful paintings, and just a 1 inch square book and a whole worldview in it. So anyway, after Mani was persecuted, his followers had to leave Persia, and they went up north of Persia onto the Silk Road, Samarkand and Bukhara. And then some of them went east, because a world religion is a great thing to pass on to the rest of the world. Some of them went east to China, all the way down into southeast China. There were Manichaean Chinese in 17th century China in the southeast. And some of them went west, through the Caucasus, across the Black Sea, into Asia Minor, and then from Asia Minor, these were the Paulicians. And these were the Paulicians who held out. They had their own culture for a couple of hundred years there. They were fearsome protectors and warriors to protect their own worldview. Eventually they were overrun by force of numbers by the Byzantines, who then transported them from here, 200,000 of them, to here, to Plovdiv, So there's a deep esoteric strain. I mean, no, they're not Paulicians today. You know, most of them were absorbed into the Catholic Church today, whereas most Bulgarians are Bulgarian Orthodox, Greek Orthodox. So there's 200,000 of them there. So Plovdiv is a real center for esoteric Gnostic spirituality. It has been over the centuries. And okay, and then you can see where else they went. After the Bogomils there in Sarajevo in Bulgaria, then it moved up to northern Italy, the Valdensians, and then to the Cathars, where we did our Esoteric Quest. So that just gives you another picture of the same thing. And let's look a little bit about Bogomil teachings. St. Paul had taught that simple-minded men should instruct one another. Well, he doesn't mean stupid, he means simple men. Therefore, they elected their teachers from among themselves to be their spiritual guides and had no special priests. They did not build churches. They did not have priests. They had parfaits, they were perfected ones, and the elect. There is a tradition that the Bogomils taught that prayers were to be said in private houses, not in separate buildings such as churches. Ordination was conferred by the congregation and not by any specially appointed minister. The congregation were the elect, and each member could obtain the perfection of Christ and become a Christ or a Christ. Marriage was not a sacrament. Bogomils refused to fast on Mondays and Fridays, rejected monasticism, and so on. Then they declared Christ to be the Son of God. So they were very opposed to the corruption of the church. So they preceded Luther, and it's one of the reasons there was a crusade declared against the Cathars in the south of France, because they had a more sophisticated and wealthy culture than the north of France. So there was a devil's bargain made between the King of France and northern knights who went then, and it was the first time a crusade was declared against fellow Christians. And terrible massacres took place in the south of France. They destroyed the beautiful Cathar culture down there. The Bogomils managed to hold out a bit longer. So so they were very much opposed to the corruption of the church, as I say. If you go to Montségur in the south of France, where we were, the cathedral, should we say, of the Cathars, but it's the most. There's no cathedral up there. It's the most gorgeous place on top of a mountain in the Alps, and the Pyrenees, in the foothills, the French foothills of the Pyrenees. It's absolutely beautiful. Anybody who feels like me that nature is their cathedral, these are our kinds of people. So, Bogomil influence here. They were the connecting link between the so-called heretical sects of the East and those of the West. They were the most active agents, or among the most active agents, in disseminating the teachings in what was then Russia, Kievan Rus. And among all the nations of Europe in the 12th and 13th century, they were already known in the West as Cathars, in other places as Bulgari. And let me just say a little about that. This is where one of my inspirations, Rudolf Steiner, has something to say. Rudolf Steiner, who's known today mostly for the Waldorf schools, the world's largest independent approach to education, biodynamic agriculture, which is really the rebirth of organic agriculture in the 20th century, and also the Camp Hill villages for special needs children and adults. But he only did all that in the last five years of his life. He died at 64. Most of his teaching life is 6,000 lectures and over 25 years. Was devoted to esoteric philosophy or holy wisdom. And so he was an amazing person. If you're not into, all I can say is I recommend getting into Rudolf Steiner. If it doesn't resonate with everybody, it happens to resonate with me. Rudolf, R-U-D-O-L-F, Steiner, S-T-E-I-N-E-R. Rudolf Steiner. Absolutely incredible human being. And certainly one of the great spiritual teachers of the West in the 20th century. But he died in 1925. But not without giving, as I was saying, 6,000 lectures that are compiled in something like 350 books. But anyway, Rudolf Steiner tells us that the people from what has been Bulgaria, regardless of which ethnic group was living there, because different ethnic groups have passed through, had a certain spiritual faculty. Like I said, they were known as Bulgari, and they were considered heretics, but before the word heretic took on the meaning that it had in the late Middle Ages, which meant you were a candidate for being burned at the stake. It's a heretic in the early Middle Ages, the 8th, 7th, 8th, 9th century, so-called Dark Ages as it used to be called. They're simply considered people who thought differently. They had a different understanding of spirituality, but they were not hated or despised, they were just different. And what Steiner tells us is that they had a different subtle constitution in their subtle bodies, should we say, if you're into the etheric and astral bodies and so on. But so anyway, what it meant was that when they fell asleep at night, instead of going straight into the dream world or into dreamless sleep, they entered into a world of light and tone, where they were conscious in this world of light and tone. And as a result, they were conscious of what they would have called the Father God. They were conscious of the Father God existing in the inner spiritual world because they experienced it each night before they fell into deep, deep sleep. They would enter into this world of light and tone. And when they returned from sleep in the morning, the way it affected them is that they would actually see a kind of aura around in the meadows, in the forests, in the mountains. They would see a kind of aura around them. So they would have a living sense of a spiritual existence, both in the inner world at night and in the outer world during the day. So they had a different relationship to spirituality. They were not so into the pronouncements of the church. They were into their own practice. And of course Orpheus was able to charm the very stones, bring them all alive. So this is the world of an alive nature. It's not a dead nature as scientific materialism would tell us right now, but this is a living nature.
Cathars, are they a tribe or were they?
No, the Cathars were in the south of France, in Languedoc. We did a whole quest around them. So it's, do you know Cathars? It's the part of France just north of Barcelona. And no, they weren't a tribe. They were people living in that part of France who, it was the spiritual path, Catharism. So it was a Gnostic, Manichaean spiritual path. But within the Christian tradition, they consider themselves true Christians, and the Pope to be, more like I don't know if they called him the Antichrist, but they were not fans. So, okay, so that's the Bogomils there. That's the same thing. Now back to Plovdiv again. Now, one of the things that happened in Bulgaria when it was liberated from the Turks in the 1880s is that this is known as the period as Bulgarian revival, the national revival. And so there were all these beautiful houses built. A lot of them were built by Armenian merchants. There's a strong connection between Armenia and Plovdiv, I guess, going back to the 9th century. But that's we're going to do. Well, talking of music, talking of tones, what we're going to do in one of these beautiful houses, arguably the most beautiful, the Balabanova house, is that we're going to have an evening performance. Because music, art, it's all an integral part of the quest, as you'll see from the brochure. Culture is an integral part of it. But we're going to have a performance by a Bulgarian male choir. And of course, the Bulgarian music is filled with all these polyphonic tones. I don't know how many of you have heard it became world famous, Le Mystère des Voix Bulgares, the mystery of the Bulgarian voice. And so it made me wonder when I read that in Steiner, all these tones, unusual tones that there are in Bulgarian music, does it hark back in some way to that time when the people living in this region actually experienced that world of light and tone before falling asleep, and those tones have been carried over to the unique polytonal music that exists in Bulgaria. So we're going to have a performance in the evening of that. We'll also have some Bulgarian folk dance, of course. How could you go to Bulgaria without that? So those are the revival houses. That's just an image of Plovdiv itself. The old city, which goes back 6,000 years, is on this hill here. Plovdiv was on the main route from Rome to Constantinople. So, in the latter part of the Roman Empire, when you had the Eastern and the Western Empire, it was right on the main road. There's an enormous, it's called a Colosseum, almost the same size as the one in Rome. in Plovdiv that's under the main city, and you saw the Roman theatre. So it was huge in Roman times. That's just a little glimpse of Plovdiv there, just so you can see the kind of broken stones and the little wooden houses. That's what the old city of Plovdiv looks like. That's a part of it by night there. You just see the old walls. That's the Alexander Nevsky Cathedral. So remember, we'll land in Sofia. We'll meet in Sofia. We will dine that night in my favorite restaurant there, Hadji Draganovich Izby. It's like stepping back into the 18th century in Bulgaria. It's all, barrels of wine. It's in a basement. Next thing you know, dancers. Last time I was there, some of these people who were diners just got up and started dancing, doing circle dances. And you're definitely in another world in Hadji Draganovich. Izby in Sofia. So that'll be our first night. But then in the morning we go here to the Alexander Nevsky Cathedral, and then in the latter part of the morning we go to the Archaeological Museum with those incredible figures in it going back through 35,000 years. And then in the afternoon we will head down to the Valley of the Thracian Kings, to the wine spa there, and we'll spend a night there. And then in the morning we will go to these ancient Thracian initiation centers. And it will have Bulgaria's leading authority. Well, we've got Uri Stoyanov with us. You can't do better than that. In fact, Yuri's going to be with us on the whole trip in Bulgaria. And Diana Gergova, who is Bulgaria's leading authority on, leading archaeologist, and certainly their leading expert on Thrace. Here we go. Bulgarian folk dance. So we'll certainly have somebody performing that, and with a bit of luck, those of us who've got the courage can get up and shake a leg too. And I lived in Scotland in the late 80s, and I learned a lot of Bulgarian and Greek folk dances from an old German dance master who had been the master of the Dresden Ballet, and then spent a lot of time in the Balkans and Eastern Europe after the Second World War, and he was a maestro. So I learned a lot of Balkan dances in my 20s. And they're hilarious. I mean, I found them extremely entertaining and a lot of fun. I mean, there can be a sacred dimension to some of the slower ones, but they're just a blast. You can see these people are having fun. So see them there, all dancing in a circle. And now here's something just to bring us up to more contemporary times. As I say, this is a guy called Peter Dunov. Now, Peter Dunov was actually a contemporary of Rudolf Steiner, late 19th, early 20th century. And some of you may have heard of a guy called Omram Mikhail Ivanov. Does that ring a bell, anybody? And the Great White Brotherhood. You can hardly imagine a less politically correct term at this point than the Great White Brotherhood. But he wasn't thinking of that 100 years ago. I mean, I'm sure some of you have come across the concept of the White Brotherhood, the enlightened spiritual beings on the inner planes in what the Asia calls Shambhala, that gaze down upon humanity. Anyway, Peter Dunov started this whole pan-eurythmy movement. We have an image in the brochure of a spiral thing that they've laid out in the mountains where they perform their different spiritual attunements to nature. But I've actually found somebody who's a real authority on both Rudolf Steiner and on Peter Dunov. And Peter Dunov, Rudolf Steiner, who's nobody's idea of a fool, a brilliantly perceptive person, he considered Dunov to be a person of authentic spiritual stature. Even though his successors, Omram Mikhail Ivanov, that's a bit more mixed. But this guy was apparently the real thing. So we're actually going to have a presentation on Peter Dunov. He's a living exemplar. He would have considered himself connected to the Bogomil traditions. So he brought that right up into the 20th century, the late 19th, early 20th century. And his whole spiritual movement is still strong in Quebec and in Bulgaria too, and I'm sure it is in other parts of the world too. But he's a very intriguing figure. He certainly looks the part, doesn't he? So. Now, Andrea can tell you more about all of these, but as you know, we nearly always do, 2 post-conference journeys. One will stay in Bulgaria and the other's going to go to Romania. It ain't hard to get to. You just have to go back to Sofia, and it's a 1-hour flight from Sofia to Bucharest, the capital of Romania. And then from Romania, we will head north. I'm from Bucharest. We will head north. And we will head into Transylvania. Yeah. Got your steaks at the ready. Yeah, but of course, I've been to so-called Dracula's castle. I'm sorry to say it's a hype. He was never even actually there. It's mostly about Queen Maria of Romania in the late 19th, who was actually English, a relative of Queen Victoria. There's a little bit up at the top about Dracula, but of course he wasn't a real historical. He was based on what I call Vlad Tepes, Vlad the Impaler, and Bram Stoker, who wrote it. But it was inspired by the folklore. The folklore of Transylvania does include notions of the undead and the stakes driven into the heart and so on and so forth. But we're not focusing on that. We'll pass through the town of Sighiswara, which is where Vlad Tepes was born. But you can tell the landscape in Transylvania is very different from Bulgaria. It's lusher, it's more verdant. So that's just to give you a little taste of the Transylvanian countryside. Now this is, it's a fortified Saxon village in the village of Viskri. That's a fortified church, because in the Middle Ages, the king of Hungary, when Hungary was much bigger than it is now, he actually invited the Saxons to come east to Transylvania because he was looking for protection from marauding bands of Tartars who were still coming in, and from the Turks coming up from the southeast. So you have all these Saxons who've been there since the Middle Ages, and they built these fortified churches. And it's in a beautiful little village called Viskri. I mean, our first night in Romania will just be in Bucharest, staying at the airport, because we won't have time to go anywhere else. We'll do nothing but sleep at the hotel that first night, because we won't get there till 9 or 10 o'clock at night. But in the morning, we're going to drive to Viskri. And really, to me, when I was in Romania in November, December, it was just one of the most charming places. It's another world. It's untouched. It's, you've still got geese in the main street. You got horses that come out and drink from an old stone trough. It's surrounded by miles and miles of just hills with shepherds. It's still that archetypal romantic thing of people on hay wains being pulled by horses. It's another world. So we're calling this the heart of medieval folkloric Transylvania. My friend Rudolf Steiner actually says about this, the reason I went to Viskri, is he says that these Transylvanian Saxon villages actually preserve the original Christmas plays. They preserve the true spirit of Christmas right up into the second half of the 19th century, because these Saxon villages would actually perform these Christmas plays. And they had such a powerful spiritual impact on the whole village that even the most notorious scamp and roustabout, everybody would get caught up in the role that they were playing. And so there was a true feeling for the beauty of the genuine Christmas spirit right there in those Transylvanian villages. And more common references, remember the Pied Piper, the story of the Pied Piper, when he leads the children into the mountain, they come out the other side in Transylvania, in Brasov, which is not far from here. So, yeah. Oh, I should also say about Bulgaria, before we totally go into Romania, that one of the real achievements of Bulgaria was that most of the members of the Jewish community were saved in the Second World War. Unlike Romania, yeah.
I didn't hear that.
They were saved from being transported. Yeah, it's a whole extraordinary story about how the Bulgarians managed to prevent that from happening. Wow. And of course, they were controlled by the Axis powers in the Second World War, but they used their influence to prevent mass murder. Okay, so here's Romania. Here's Bucharest, which we'll fly from Sofia to Bucharest. Then we don't have it on here, but where can I? Sibiu, where's Sighiswara? That's where Vlad Tepes was born. Viskri is a tiny village. It's in here, but that's that beautiful little village It's like being in another world. It's really like being in the 18th century. It's just charming. And Prince Charles, he put it on the map, he bought a house there. And his family is descended from Transylvania, apparently. As he said, he has a stake in it. That's his little pun. So, not that I'm a big fan of the British royalty, but he's a holistic guy, Prince Charles, amazingly enough. So we'll start off down here in Bucharest. We go up to Sigis, we spend the night in Viscri around here, in that beautiful little Saxon village. We go up, we drive through Sighiswara, then we go to Cluj, which is Cluj-Napoca, which is the capital of Transylvania. We'll spend a night there. We'll look around. It has a lovely old medieval center to it. Then we journey on to Maramureș and Bukovina. See these two here? It's where Romania butts up against the Ukraine. And this is really like stepping into another reality. We have some pictures of it in the brochure and on the website. But it's what I just described. It's, farmers on big piles of hay in carts being pulled by horses in gorgeous countryside. It's totally, it's uncorrupted by the modern material world. You can still feel like you're stepping back in time. The people talk about it having a timeless quality to it. So that's Romania. This is Maramureș, which is noticed for extraordinary wooden churches. They're unique. There's nothing like them in the world. Oh, so, what happened there? Okay. So that's just, Andrea has a lot more information. Anybody who has any questions about the post-conference trip to Transylvania, Maramureș, and Bukovina, and then I want to mention lastly, the second post-conference journey stays in Bulgaria. And Uri Stoyanov will be with us. And that is a picture of the cave in the Rhodope Mountains where Orpheus is said to have descended into the underworld. Can you make it out there? Can you just see, you can see these lights? You sort of descend on this it was completely deserted when I was there. There was nobody there except my driver. And and as I said, that whole huge cavern is filled with the massive resounding echoes of, it sounds like a gargantuan underground river. Apparently it's the largest underground river and waterfall in the whole of the Balkans. But you can't see it, at least I couldn't see it, but it's just, you're stepping into another reality. So, that's a real, you can feel, I can see Orpheus beginning to descend into the underworld there. So I had a wonderful meditation at the foot of that, because I was privileged to be there was nobody there. So that's where our first night in staying in Bulgaria. This is about a 3-hour drive from Plovdiv, southwest into the Rhodope Mountains. It's just a matter of a few miles from the border of Greece. And then we will journey through other aspects of the Rhodope Mountains where the old Thracian mysteries was celebrated. So really, it's more like Stonehenge than it is like Delphi, in the sense that you don't have things as well preserved. The Thracian culture is so ancient. So we'll be passing through spending the time in these beautiful old Thracian mystery centers and initiation centers. And remember, the Thracians were focused on the immortalization of the soul. That was their big focus in their mysteries. And so tombs were very important to them. And then after our last 3 nights in Bulgaria will be spent on the Black Sea. Now the Black Sea was, of course, this is where Jason and the Argonauts were seeking the Golden Fleece. There were Greek colonies all around, ancient Greek colonies all around the Black Sea, and we'll be visiting those. Uri Stoyanov was actually born on the Black Sea in Varna. He knows everything there is to know about it. You'll find more detail in the brochure and on the website. But where we're going to wind up, this is where we're going to wind up. So it's just sunrise on the Black Sea. Because Bulgaria faces east, you get sunrise rather than sunset on the Black Sea. And so, we'll be in a beautiful town called Nesebar. There's a picture of it in the brochure, which juts out on a peninsula. It's known as the Ravenna of Bulgaria, for those of you who've been to Ravenna in Italy. And Varna, further north, well, we've concluded that's where the Varna gold, it's the most remarkable gold ornaments in the whole of world history. all there in the Varna Museum. And also there was an old, just outside Varna, there was an old Byzantine monastery there that is burrowed into a cliffside. And I think with a bit of luck, Uri tells me that we're going to be able to actually hear a performance of sacred music inside the caves of the old cave monastery that's been there since Byzantine times. So I think that's the last slide. So so Andrew, do you want to come up? And anybody got any questions? Yes.